Futaba is the most realistic depiction of a hacker in this video. Hell, she's one of the most realistic characters in Japanese game history, which is why I have such praise for Persona 5, but that's beside the point. It takes 10,000 hours to master something, and the other characters in this video don't give off the impression of spending that amount of time doing something as solitary and lonely as hacking. I would estimate that I've spent around or over 10,000 hours playing single-player games, and I'm equally as bad at socializing as Futaba, but that could also be the autism. That might not seem like a flex to some of you, and it isn't meant to be, but Futaba and I are young, so to spend over a full years of our early adult lives on one activity is a bit concerning, according to my parents. But Futaba is an incredibly accurate depiction of how it feels to be a prodigy of something at a young age. Side note, I'm not one of the best gamers by any means, but maybe if I focused my time on one genre that might have been different. I can also appreciate why she starts hacking. She finds something to throw herself into after a horrible event befalls her. Mine was when I got kicked out of school, and hers is the death of her mother. And I also love how both of our addictions were transformed into something positive. Futaba became the most helpful member of the Thieves, both from a gameplay and story perspective, and I started this channel to give some purpose to all those games I played. Otacon is also a great depiction of an obsessive person who spent a significant amount of time learning a complex skill, as he's incredibly socially awkward. This is shown through his introduction, where he pisses himself, and Christopher Randolph's shaky voice performance, which gives him an air of cowardice. Similarly to Futaba, he throws himself into computers after a significantly more horrifying and personal family tragedy, and the character portrays an incredibly accurate depiction of what someone who dedicated a large amount of their time to a lonely hobby like working with computers would be. When Kojima was 4 years old, his family moved to Osaka. He describes spending most of his time watching TV and making figurines after moving to the prefecture, so I think he also knows what it's like to be alone for considerable periods of time at such a young age, and this shows in how he characterizes Otacon. Although I sort of dislike how much of a Mary Sue Otacon is in terms of technical knowledge. It's not enough that he's a master hacker, but also an engineer capable of building Metal Gear and an excellent driver and helicopter pilot. It all feels like a bit too much for one character, but his timid personality does help to balance out his many expertise. Now we're getting into the more aesthetic hackers like Sombra. Now granted, she lives in a sci-fi world, so perhaps mastering hacking is much easier, though Overwatch isn't too far in the future, so I have my doubts. You don't really associate hackers with direct combat, and certainly not covert ops. Well, not covert ops while being in the field. Hackers are always the background characters supporting the protagonist, but I suppose Overwatch doesn't have a protagonist. But again, it feels too much like Sombra is good at everything, hacking, stealth, and assassination. It all feels like a bit too much for someone who isn't a trained soldier. The same goes for Marcus Holloway from Watch Dogs 2. He's so upbeat and social, and he acts like his life is so chilled out and it's been nothing but peachy, with him having tons of friends and being one of the cool kids, when, you know, he's a violent murderer. Now, I can forgive this a little because Watch Dogs 2 is meant to be a power fantasy game that appeals to teenagers and young adults, but master hacker, athletic gymnast, expert marksman, and social personality are not a list of character traits that work for any type of game outside of a power fantasy, and it ends up disconnecting Marcus from the audience as this sort of perfect guy that can't be touched. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm upset that these games don't conform to the stereotypes of hackers being weak, quirky nerds. It's just that all these characters are so young that it doesn't seem to me that a significant part of their lives was spent behind a computer screen. Unlike Sam Fisher, this is an aged protagonist who's grizzled and old before his first adventure even begins. You can accept that this guy is an expert at so many things because he's lived a long and experienced life, so your mind can accept that he's a stealthy, sharpshooting, tactical master hacker. He behaves like someone who has spent the majority of his life dedicated to his job. He's not a social butterfly, but he's highly talented because he's introduced to us as an established badass. By not showing us his training, our minds can fill in what he was doing up till now to become the hero that we know. Well, new, I suppose. Come on, Ubisoft, bring him back. Let's close this out with Tali. who is another perfect example of a hacker like Futaba. She's nerdy and excitable because of her lack of social interaction, and this is conveyed in her character design, as her face is obscured behind a visor. She has literally lived her whole life behind a screen. She's also far and away the best companion in the original game from a gameplay perspective, as her hacking will send the Geth haywire into attacking each other. Add onto that a charming personality and an infectious cuteness, and you have the perfect sci-fi hacker archetype. If you're interested in seeing more Mass Effect content, then check out this video on how we as a species massively affected the in-game universe, and I'll see you in 2 days.